Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be painting this train for the first day of World Watercolor Month. I am going to use my Lukas 1862 watercolors. It's what I normally use for my small quick paintings. It's inexpensive and good quality. I'm going to pick about 5 or 6 colors for the train because I want to keep everything cohesive and not be tempted by the 72 colors I have here. This is a picture of the train. I got it from Unsplash, and it's royalty free, so we can use it today. The first color I grabbed is Viridian. It's a good green to use for the leaves. I can mix blues to make it darker, yellows to make it lighter, so it'll work well. This next one, Neutral Tint. I normally don't go with this, but I know I'm going to need some darks. This one is Indanthrone, Cadmium Red Deep, Gamboge, and I decided to use Burnt Sienna for some of my browns. You don't need these exact colors to do this painting. Just make sure you have a few darks, a warm red, a warm yellow, and whatever brown you prefer. I always like to tape my paintings down to a hard surface. I do this because it helps prevent the paper from buckling. I am using Arches paper, so there shouldn't be too much of an issue with the paper buckling, but I do like to make sure that it's lying nice and flat just to prevent any warpage. I am using regular old masking tape for this. It's not very sticky. It's kind of a cheap brand, so it will peel off the paper easily. The only downside to using this, I don't believe it's archival, so you wouldn't necessarily want to do this for a painting that you'd be selling. You might want to cut off the edges of the paper when you're done, if that was the case. I have 2 jars of water, one for cleaning my brushes and the other for painting. I have my cloth that I can use to wipe my brushes off on, and I have a mix of Mimic brushes from Jerry's Artarama, and I have Escoda Versatile brushes, and I think I got those from dickblick.com. I use this watercolor sketchbook to test out any color mixes I'm unsure of before I paint them directly onto my painting. And I use this masking fluid. It's fine liner masking fluid. I think I got it from Amazon, and I just use it to block off areas when I'm doing washes, so that way I don't need to worry about painting around them. What I like about this masking fluid is the precision tip. I can get very fine lines by just squeezing the bottle slightly. It can be a little finicky though. I found when it's very humid, it's difficult to get off the paper. If I try using a hairdryer to dry it, it won't come off the paper. So it isn't necessarily the easiest masking fluid to work with. So if you have any suggestions on a better masking fluid to use, please let me know in the comments. I'm not going to make you watch me mask for 20 minutes, so I'll just let you know what I masked. I masked these fence posts, I masked the sign that's posted on the tunnel, and I did little dots of masking fluid to mark where the little white flowers are at the edges of the tunnel. I also masked the lights. I'm just testing the masking fluid to see if it's dry enough to start painting, and it's still tacky, but it is so humid where I am right now, I don't think it's going to get any drier. So let's start painting. To save you some time from watching my entire process all the way through, a lot of these sections of the video are sped up quite a bit. This is one of them. I used my red, my yellow, and my brown to just go in and start lightly washing in my lights and the trim on the front of the train. I'm painting the lights by doing a very light wash of water first, letting it dry a little bit, and then going in and dabbing some color to make it a little bit more vibrant. I'm mixing some yellow to warm up the green, and I'm also mixing in a little bit of neutral tint to darken it down. To paint this part of the train, I have no idea what it is. I'm not sure if it's a reflection of the leaves that are coming at the train or a hole in the train. I'm not a train expert. I'm starting the smoke by putting a light wash of water down. I want to add color very, very gradually because the smoke is so light. I'm using my neutral tint and my Indanthrone blue to kind of have a cool, smoky color. When I'm painting, especially with watercolor, I'm always trying to think ahead, and I know once I go back and cut in the dark areas of the tunnel, the smoke is going to show up a lot more. My next step is to start blocking in my color. I'm starting off with the tracks, and there's a little bit of gray stone underneath the slats of the track. And I'm creating that color using a little bit of brown and my blue and my gray and just doing a light wash. Noticed I put down a little bit too much color right off the bat, and I didn't want to keep adding water, so I used my towel to mop up some of that extra color. Over here, I'm using my Viridian, my yellow, and a touch of brown to put in a late tone of greenery. Later on, after I've gotten more of the background done and I have more of an idea of the tones of my painting, I'll go in and add some shadow. But right now, I'm just focusing on blocking in the color. This is always the part of painting that I dislike the most. I feel like it looks so messy and I'm just slapping on some puddles of color, but I have to just trust the process and know that once I start adding my darker values, it's going to make all of my other things that I've already put down pop a little bit more. This is where the masking fluid truly shines and becomes very helpful. I can just take my color and blob it right over these slats of the fence, and I don't need to worry about saving the white space. The masking fluid is doing it for me. I'm using my neutral tint, my blue, and a touch of red to wash in this first layer of the train. Now, because this is a small painting, because I only have an hour or two to do the painting, and because I am not a train expert, I am leaving out tons of detail on the front of this train. I'm just doing basic shapes. I know it's going to look like a train. I know anybody looking at this painting will fill in the details on their own. It's not going to not look like a train because I didn't put in every coil and wire. So the tunnel wall has a slightly different gray tone from the train. When I do my wash for the tunnel, I'm only using the blue and the neutral tint. I don't need to add the red. The red made the train look a little bit warmer, and I'm trying to keep the stone nice and cool. I'm focusing on the tunnel now because I need to wait for the train to dry before I start adding details. It's very important when you're painting in layers to make sure you let it completely dry. If not, when you go in, you're going to make your new marks bleed into areas you don't want them to go to. You'll see that happen a little bit later when I start making indications of the bricks on the edge of the tunnel. And occasionally you'll see me touching the paper. And when I'm touching the paper, I'm touching to feel for any coolness. If you feel that the paper is cool, then that means it's still damp, it's still wet, and you gotta wait. You gotta walk away, turn a fan on, let it dry. And right here is where my paint bled. I was able to use some clear water to clean up the edges a little bit, and I wasn't overly worried about this area because it's rocks, it's stone, they have texture. I knew when I was going to go back, I could fix it and make it look a little bit better. Now that my train is dry, I can start going in and putting shadows around the train and the dark areas around the train without worrying about paint bleeding into the train into spots I don't want it to. I'm using my blue and my neutral tint to create the darkness of the tunnel. I don't like using the straight neutral tint because I find it to be kind of flat. I like using the blue to give it a little bit more dimension. Now, because I'm working with rocks, I actually want the paint to bleed a little bit. So instead of letting that super dark color dry, I'm going immediately into painting the rim of the tunnel, and I'm using a little bit more brown to create warmth to show that light is hitting that part of the tunnel. To create the texture, I'm doing a combination of dabbing in dark spots of paint and then drying my brush off on my towel and lifting a little bit of color off the paper. So between those two techniques, I'm able to create a rock-like texture. And then I'm just filling in the dark tunnel color on this side of the train. I have to be careful that I make sure I cut in my smoke and I don't go too far into where I want to retain my light colors. I end up using a wash of water near the smoke just to blend it and make it not so harsh of a line. I want it to look poofy. While I am waiting for my tunnel and my train and my smoke to dry, I am using my brown, my yellow, and my red to paint in my tracks. And while I'm blocking in this color, my stones are drying, so I'll be able to go in and add detail over there. One of the easiest ways to create texture on stone is using cold pressed paper, which has a little bit more texture, and a fairly dry brush. When I'm adding the paint to my brush, I make sure that I don't put in a lot of water, and I'm just using the side of the brush and I'm dragging it across the paper lightly, so that way it picks up the color, the bumps of the paper pick up the color, and I'm not putting in a really watery wash. I'll proceed to do the same procedure over the wall of the tunnel itself. Occasionally, I'll cut in some dark areas and some dark edges where I know I'm going to blend out for shadows. But I just make sure I try to miss my leaves. I just paint loosely around them using the dry brush technique, and I think it gives a nice effect. Now, once this is dry, I am going to go over it and do a light wash of water just to blend it out and make it not so harsh, but it's still going to retain most of that texture. So let's skip to where most of the tunnel has that initial layer of texture done. What I'm doing at this point now is I'm making sure I put in my really dark areas. I'm putting in the indications of lines between my bricks. And I'm starting to do more of a wash onto the bricks. The bricks do have a lot of color, so I want to make sure that I capture that. As I'm starting to add the dark areas to the tunnel wall, I can see that my leaves definitely need a little bit more definition. So I'm going back in with my Viridian and some of the Indanthrone Blue to create a darker green. And I am marking in some shadows. I'm not trying to be too particular about it. I just want to make sure that there are indications of where shadows might be. Right here, I'm using my brush that's been dried on my towel to lift light spots to make indications of individual stones in the tunnel wall. So I think I'm going to skip a little bit further into this video. All I am doing right now is I'm referencing my photo and I'm adding in a combination of washes and dry brushing just to get my darks into my painting. I'm using my yellow, my brown, and a hint of red to block in the colors of the fence on the side over here. I ended up having to clean up the edges because it bled into the stones on the ground. It was a little bit too wet and I shouldn't have put the yellow down so quickly. I'm using my Viridian mixed with my dark blue and a tiny bit of brown just to make the colors a little bit less vivid and more realistic. And I'm using that for the shadows on the leaves. I'm softening up some of the hard edges of my smoke, and I'm doing that by just using clear water. I also let some of the paint from the tunnel bleed into the smoke a little bit to soften up those edges, And I grabbed a little bit of color from my palette just to add a little bit of shadow and depth to the smoke. I'm again using my brown, my yellow, and my red to work on the fence. This time I'm using more brown and more red to create a deeper color to create the shadows in the slats of the fence. I'm not trying to be too particular about the placements of the slats of the fences. I'm just trying to do a general indication of where there'd be some light and some shadow. And any place where I need a little bit of extra darkness, I'm throwing in a little bit of the Indian Throne Blue to create a little bit more of a deeper value. This is where I start to add a little bit more detail to the train, a little bit of shadow. And the only tip I can give you on this is keep referring to your reference photo. That's going to be the place where you're going to get your most information. Don't try to guess where the shadows go. Actually look and see where they're supposed to be. And when you are at this stage of the painting, do not be afraid to go in with really dark darks. That's what's going to make your object look really 3D and a little bit more realistic and give you the depth that you're looking for and not make it look so flat. I'm darkening up the rails of the train over here. Again, I'm using my same three colors, my red, my orange, and my brown, but I'm adding a little bit of neutral tint just to darken it up a tad. And that way I can create the shadow side of my train rails. This is probably the most fun part for me. I'm just going in and adding my detail and adding my darkness and making sure I have everything I need to make the painting look a little bit more complete. However, I think for a viewer, this is probably the most boring part. It's just a little dab of paint here, a little dab of paint there. So I'll skip through a chunk of the video so that way you can see where we end up. Once I add the blue and gray wash to the side of the circle of the train, you can really see it starting to come together. And I really don't think that the painting is sacrificed too much by not having all the tiny little details and springs and coils and cogs of the train. I think it would be too congested and fiddly. But I did grab a liner brush and put in one little wire off to the right of the painting and the little eagle thing, whatever it is, at the top part of the train. Here I am tapping my paper again. This time I'm really making sure it's perfectly dry before I start taking off my masking. Over here, I'm starting to rub the masking fluid off of the painting. And again, because it's so humid, I'm having a really hard time getting it off. I tried using my kneadable eraser to rub it off. Usually that works, but this time it just wasn't. So I ended up just having to have some patience. But ooh, does it look good when it comes off. I have these perfectly crisp white lines that I'm able to go in and paint with the same colors that I painted my other fence pieces with. Right here you can see me exposing the little white flowers that were protected by the masking fluid from the background wash. There was no way I could have painted around this, and I don't particularly like to go in and use white paint for details. I think it takes away sometimes from the painting. And I'm going in and adding color to the fence posts and adding some shadows towards the bottom of the fence and anywhere else where I need a little bit more definition to show the different planes, like the vertical planes from the horizontal planes. Now I'm a little bit mad at myself over here. The rectangle of red, whatever that plate is on the train, that came out okay. The masking fluid came off that area. But the two little red poles, I should have waited for the paper to dry a little bit more, and I was too impatient and I rubbed it a little bit too early and it didn't come out as clean as I would have liked to. So you live and you learn. Try not to make the same mistake twice. And now I'm just adding a few more dark areas and shadow to make certain other lighter areas pop a little bit more. I keep referring again to my reference photo. You don't want to put these marks randomly. You want to make sure there's a reason for why you're putting them down. And then I'm also going in and making a little bit of an indication of where some of the bricks are in the wall. And then once it's dry, I'm able to peel off the masking tape. This is one of my favorite steps because I love those clean edges. It makes the painting look more finished once you expose the border. And painting number 1 of World Watercolor Month is done. Now, I want you guys to keep me motivated. I want to do a painting a day this entire month and post them on YouTube. So let me know if this is what you want to see, if you want to see more real-time videos, if you don't mind them sped up a little bit. And thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions down in the bottom.